Hey you, yes you, spoilers for this game you. Go eat a sandwich or something, I don't know. Fighting enemies is something that is common in many games. Whether it's the first Goomba from Mario or some giant monstrosity, there's generally some sort of enemy the player has to fight in order to get through the game. Welcome to The Medium is Meaning, a series where I'll be examining and delving into the way games uses its interactivity and gameplay mechanics to enhance and in some cases detract from the narratives they're trying to tell. And hopefully we'll be able to show how effective games can be as a medium to tell stories. Enemies are generally used as an obstacle for the player to get past to reach the end. And while that's still the case nowadays, there are plenty of games out there that use this common aspect in order to add to the stories and worlds the writer wants to create. Let's start by looking at one of the most revered video game stories of all time, The Last of Us. It's alright. While the narrative didn't resonate with me like with a lot of other people, it's still a really solid story that's well written, well directed, and well acted. Though it does veer a little into games trying to imitate a movie that most AAA games are trying to do nowadays, with cutscene after cutscene, or characters slowly walking forward while talking without any gameplay. With that being said, whenever there is gameplay, it does fit in with the story and the world quite well. The Last of Us is a post-apocalyptic zombie survival game, one where a fungi infects humans, basically turning them into zombie-like creatures called clickers, and the protagonist Joel has to travel across America with a girl named Ellie. Because the game takes place in a post-apocalyptic setting where people struggle to get by to survive, which was effectively set up by having the player walk through a town seeing how the people live in a world like this, a lot of the combat encounters against the infected, and even the humans, need to be approached with a calculated and stealthy manner. The infected will charge at Joel immediately when they spot, or in the clicker's case, hear him, creating a scenario where the player has to risk getting away and trying to hide, or expend resources and firearms to take out the threat. Resources needed for ammo and other items are scarce and scattered about, and the type of melee weapons that can be used are just regular items that can be found around, such as a piece of wood, or if lucky, a baseball bat left from when the world wasn't so desolate. Want to make that piece of wood hit harder? Simply scrounge up the nails needed and attach them to the wood. All of this contributes toward the context of the setting and world building. This creates the scenario for the player where strategizing how to take out enemies while trying to conserve resources is a must. And when they do get caught, it's a panic of decision making deciding whether to fight or flight. This also extends to the game's crafting system as well, where all of it is done real time on the fly, with the risk of being left vulnerable for an attack, further emphasizing the frantic decision making the player needs to do in order to use the limited materials needed in order to survive each encounter. On top of that, it's a gamble to decide what items to actually make for a given scenario, with how scarce the materials are, especially in the middle of a fight. The gameplay in The Last of Us instills a sense of dread, danger, and frantic decision-making to the player, giving them a taste of how living in a setting like this would be for these characters. In something such as a post-apocalyptic movie or television show, new scenarios and challenges have to be implemented into the narrative to keep things fresh and tense. And yes, the story of The Last of Us does do these things to achieve the purpose of demonstrating how desolate the world is, and the tense situation Joel and Ellie have to go through in order to survive. In fact, in a keynote he did for the International Games Developer Association, the writer of The Last of Us, Neil Druckmann, said the story was initially inspired by the game Eco, but also movies such as Sin City and The Night of the Living Dead. But it's the moment-to-moment gameplay of needing to sneak and scrounge for resources in order to get past every encounter to actually progress through the game that enhances and keeps the bleak vibe going through the game's 15-hour runtime. Sure, it's the same thing being done over and over again, but it's able to stave off losing the tense and uneasy vibes because instead of merely watching a character succeed, the survival of Joel is dependent on the hands of the player. Thus, the brutal nature of the gameplay enhances the brutal story being told. The same cannot be said for one of Naughty Dog's other series, Uncharted. Now, I genuinely do enjoy the Uncharted series. Most of the games have engaging stories with fantastic action set pieces, and overall has this campy and fun vibe to it. But there's also a human element with the protagonist of Nathan Drake, just being a regular 2-bit thief stumbling into these over-the-top and grand situations. At his core, Nathan Drake craves adventure and excitement, but he's also a relatable guy with friends and family he wants to protect just like the rest of us. Look, he even eats at Subway. He's a relatable character that also just so happens to slaughter hundreds of people in each game, all while making funky quips about it.
Oh, Kitty got wet. Okay, mango.
What are you on about?
Oh, it's my safe word. Kitty got wet.
I get that there will be goons trying to stop Nate and his group in their race to reach the treasure or artifact, and how they'll have to fight and kill in order to reach their goal. That's just how it is in these adventure stories. So the context for Nate having to murder isn't the issue, but rather it's the amount and how he shows zero remorse for it.
Oh, don't worry about him, Nadine. These guys don't kill anyone in cold blood. It's just not their style.
Guys don't kill anyone in cold blood, it's just not their style.
It's because Uncharted is a video game first and foremost. There has to be frequent shootouts with enemies littered through the course of the game. This causes a dissonance between the character of Nathan Drake and his actions the player hasn't performed during the gameplay segments. It's kind of difficult to connect with the struggles the character is going through on screen when he was trigger happy the scenes before and afterwards. There's even a kill counter built into the game. But hey, at least he likes Subway. Ugh. The problem is exacerbated even further if we look at the character of Elena Fisher, a journalist that eventually becomes Nate's wife. Sure, it can be argued that Nate lived a life of doing shady things, even though I don't think that constitutes a slaughtering hundreds of people, but whatever. We have Elena, who at the start of the first game was just along to get the scoop about Sir Francis Drake's coffin. It's confirmed that she's never used a gun in the first cutscene of the game.
Do you know how to use one of these?
Yeah, it's like a camera. You point and shoot, right?
Good girl. Here we go.
Not even a few minutes later. And Jesus Christ, she starts making quips right after murdering multiple people for the first time. I get Uncharted isn't the most serious thing out there. It's supposed to be over-the-top Indiana Jones-like fun, about an ordinary guy stumbling into extraordinary circumstances. And I'm not saying it should be all gritty, exploring the psychological trauma Nathan Drake goes through, as he has to take the lives of others, driving him to a pit of insanity as he becomes the shell of his former self. God no. But ultimately, these gameplay segments detract from the characters and the story being told, instead of enhancing it. However, Uncharted 4 did improve on this aspect ever so slightly. Yes, there's still tons of shootouts and action set pieces where people get blown up and shot by Nate left and right, but with a more focus on stealth mechanics, the player can progress through quite a few areas without having to take the lives of anyone. This fits in with the direction of Nathan's character in 4. He and Elena decided to settle down and live a normal life after the events of Uncharted 3, with 4 taking place several years afterwards. So when he's thrusted back into adventure, it's natural for him to be more reserved in each combat encounter. It's an extra sprinkle of characterization told by the gameplay rather than being outright exposited to the player. On the flip side, the Tomb Raider reboot in 2013 by Crystal Dynamics also improves on this aspect a little, but not by much. Since this is her origin before becoming the Tomb Raider, Lara Croft, similar to Nate, is depicted as a normal person being thrown into extraordinary situations. She's a researcher off to explore the island of Yamatai before a storm strands her and her crew on an island filled with cultists. Though because the Tomb Raider reboot series is a more gritty series, it leaning more towards the survival aspect in addition to Lara rarely cracking jokes, contextually Lara having to struggle to survive as well as fight her way out of the people trying to kill her seems more grounded. There's also an effective scene from the first game where Laura's first to murder for the first time. She's genuinely terrified of taking a life because, that seems like a normal reaction to have. And then... Like, holy geez, she becomes a one-woman army in the later entries, mowing down militia groups and roasting them alive with Molotov cocktails. Look, she's even wrestling a bear now. Should have given it a Subway. That's not to say any of the stories these games tell are bad, and it's not really a big deal in the grand scheme of things if you're willing to suspend your disbelief.
These guys don't kill anyone in cold blood, it's just not their style.
Okay, maybe not that one. I just wish there was more of a natural transition from the shock of killing someone to immediately mowing down enemies because the game needs shootouts. It's because of this gameplay and story dissonance that I can't help but feel that these stories would have been better suited with the medium of movies or television series, but actually good this time. Okay, not holding out hope for that one either, but the idea still stands. This way, the stories and the spectacles from the set pieces can be kept intact, without having it be bogged down by the countless murders that happen to facilitate gameplay segments. Now for an example of this aspect executed well is with Fire Emblem Three Houses. Fire Emblem as a series revolves around the concept of armies battling each other in war, so naturally there's a lot of bloodshed. The series is known for its brutal difficulty, as well as a mechanic called permadeath, where if one of your units gets taken down in battle, they're considered dead and can't be used ever again. But Three Houses shakes things up a bit, and has the first half takes place in a school in a church known as Garrick Mach Monastery, complete with different houses students are assigned to depending on their place of birth. It's sort of like Harry Potter, except not written by a piss stain. As their professor, you get to see and interact with the students in multiple activities in the monastery, and leading them on missions where the battles in the game take place. Similar to Tomb Raider, it shows the reactions the students have when they have to kill for the first time. Some of them are absolutely terrified about it, while others who grew up in backgrounds of violence and bloodshed are hardly fazed by it at all.
People and beasts are as one. Calm your heart, and do not be worried about this killing.
I killed them. What have I done? The blood.
The gameplay of the player having to take out the opposing armies, or in the case of Three Houses' first half, enemies at the church, makes sense within the context of the story due to the past and present political turmoil. And having moments where the characters react to what the player is making them do enhances how ultimately tragic the situation is. You're essentially sending these kids in almost every mission to kill those who oppose the church, in order to maintain the power the church has over the kingdom of Fodlan.
So, is making us experience a real battle part of the church's teachings?
This is in addition to the support system, where your units can have conversations with each other as they increase their bonds through various activities around the monastery and as well as in battle. In these supports, some of them question if what they're doing is right. Some openly criticize the power structure of the church, while others argue about their faith in it. There is, for the most part, a natural progression between how heavy these conversations get and how far in the game you are. It makes sense that the more battles the students partake in, it would take a toll on their mentality, which is reflected in how the higher support ranks are unlocked the more you put a character into battle. This shows how the battles in Three Houses directly influences the support system the game has, which adds to the immersion that these battles, alongside their tragic pasts, take a toll on these characters, overall strengthening their writing and the world they live in. Unfortunately, it does fall into a bit of the same trap that Uncharted and Tomb Raider did, where the characters don't really say anything after the first mission about killing, and some of their level up quotes can be really funny.
This is what a real man looks like.
That's nice, Sylvain. And you as the player are kind of having fun slaughtering the opposing armies, which is fine because it's a game after all, and games are meant to be fun. That is, until a certain point in the game occurs.
Is this some kind of twisted joke? I've been looking for you. I will take that head from your shoulders and hang it from the gates of Endor!
This all changes when it transitions from the school phase of the story into the war phase, where after a 5-year time skip, the church and the 3 houses are all at war with one another. Suddenly, some of the opposing enemies you and your students have to kill on the battlefield are no longer nameless or faceless strangers, but now they are the characters you spend interacting with and getting to know and befriending during the school phase. I remember when this first happened in my first playthrough of the game, and had one of my units kill one of the other characters in the other houses. I was genuinely shocked and terrified when it happened.
Hilda! Why didn't you retreat? I counted on you retreating.
This perfectly used Fire Emblem's gameplay of commanding an army against another and turns it against the player. You don't want to see the characters try to kill each other, because you as the player already formed a connection with them. But you have to sometimes take them down because the characters are at war with one another. It conveys the bleak situation of how you will have to take the lives of others, whether stranger or former friends, in the war section of the story, because that's how dire and bloody the political situation in the game has reached. And the gameplay demonstrates how messy and traumatic the situation is for all the characters. Everyone becomes reflective of what they have to do during the battle sections of the game, and reminisce back on their school life before the war broke out, wishing that they could go back to those times.
The Great Bridge of Murden was considerably better fortified than it was 5 years ago. The bridge was full of soldiers, and they all died. And Ferdy was there. We killed Ferdy, Professor. He used to be our friend. Do you remember those days?
In fact, there are some characters you never see or fight during the battles and the time skip if you've never recruited them to your house. It's never outright confirmed, but it's implied that they decided to escape from all the fighting the game has you do, permanently. And yet, most of these characters still continue to fight in each battle. And it's these battles the player has to do in Three Houses' back half that conveys one of the core themes of the game. The characters in the game, and also you as the player, cannot change these events and battles from happening, no matter which route you choose. The characters and you as the player cannot avoid fighting the opposing armies in order to progress through the story and the game. No one can go back in time, whether it's to erase past trauma or to relive happier times. Unless you have the Protect's Divine Pulse ability that allows them to go back a few turns in battle, but I digress. All anyone can do is reflect back on those days and use it as a guide moving forward. Video games are an ever-evolving medium with an endless amount of possibilities in how a story can be presented, and we've only scratched the surface in how they can be used to show their narratives. There are plenty of more unique and interesting ways video games are able to show their stories that I can't wait to delve into. But for now, I hope this episode was able to demonstrate some of the ways games utilizes its interactivity to enhance their storytelling capabilities.